Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The town of Montgomery Heights seemed calm at first glance, but behind the pristine facades, injustices were silently brewing. In the city court, Judge Edward Whitman had reigned for over 20 years. His colleagues respected him, but few were unaware of his deeply ingrained prejudices. For him, some people were never entitled to the presumption of innocence, and he never made a secret of it. That morning, the atmosphere in the courtroom was heavy. The murmurs of the residents mingled with the creaking of the wooden benches. In the center of the room stood Aisha Johnson, a black woman in her 40s, with a proud gaze and impeccable bearing. Her case had been manipulated by her adversaries to make her appear guilty of a colossal financial fraud. Whitman looked at her with a mixture of disdain and certainty. For him, the verdict was already written. His mind was filled with clichés and snap judgments: a black woman, accused, therefore guilty. He was already relishing the idea of delivering an exemplary sentence, believing that no one would ever question his authority. But Aisha seemed neither intimidated nor frightened. Her composure contrasted sharply with the nervousness of the other witnesses and lawyers. There was something in her posture, in the way she held his gaze, that could have alerted the judge: this woman was no ordinary person. She possessed a strength and influence he couldn't possibly imagine. As Whitman prepared to deliver his verdict, he was unaware that this decision would be the beginning of a chain of events that would shatter his career and reputation, forcing him to confront the consequences of his racism in the most humiliating way possible. What he believed to be a simple trial would become the stage for a lesson in justice and karma that he would never forget. The courtroom was packed. Residents, journalists, and members of the bar watched every movement. The heavy silence was broken only by the clatter of the wooden gavel on the lectern. "Open the trial for the Johnson case," announced the clerk. Aisha Johnson, dressed in an impeccable black suit, walked calmly towards the dock. Her gaze, fixed on Judge Whitman, was neither pleading nor intimidated. She knew that it wasn't just her career that was at stake, but also her dignity. Whitman, his eyes narrowed behind his glasses, gestured to the prosecution. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are dealing here with a serious case of financial fraud." His voice already betrayed his impatience and contempt. "And," he paused, fixing Aisha with a cold sneer, "we see that the defendant is, how shall I put it, very different." A murmur rippled through the room. Aisha frowned slightly. She knew that this comment was not neutral; it carried the shadow of the judge's racism. His lawyer, Michael Rivers, quickly rose. "Your Honor, I remind you that every person accused of a crime is entitled to impartial treatment, regardless of their origin." Whitman made an impatient gesture with his hand. "Silence. I know fraud when I see it. Let's get straight to the point." Throughout the trial, Judge Whitman interrupted Aisha, minimized her arguments, and ridiculed her witnesses. Every objection was dismissed with a curt and condescending tone. The spectators felt the tension. This was not just a trial, but a demonstration of power, tinged with prejudice. Aisha, however, remained calm. She listened, noting every detail, every humiliating and unfair remark. Her mind was focused; she knew the truth would soon come out. But for now, she had to endure the judge's bias and keep her composure, because she knew that patience and strategy were her best weapons against injustice. As the day progressed, it became clear to everyone that this trial would not only be a test of the law, but a clash between arrogance and justice, between prejudice and integrity. Whitman thought he had already won, but he was still unaware that a revelation would soon turn his world upside down. After hours of testimony and tense exchanges, silence fell once more in the courtroom. Whitman rose slowly, lightly tapping the gavel on the lectern, a sign that the verdict was about to be delivered. All eyes were on him, but none were as piercing as Aisha's, calm and resolute. "Accused Aisha Johnson," Whitman began, his voice echoing through the courtroom. After carefully reviewing the case, hearing the witnesses, and evaluating the arguments, "I find you guilty of financial fraud." A murmur of indignation rippled through the courtroom. Attorney Michael Rivers' eyes widened. Your Honor. This judgment is based on assumptions, not evidence. Whitman cut him off sharply. Silence. Objections don't change the truth I clearly see. The sentence will be carried out immediately. Aisha remained motionless, but her eyes sparkled with quiet determination. She knew this was only a temporary obstacle. The judge, confident in his decision, continued, "You will be fined heavily, and your professional career will be severely impacted. Let this serve as an example to those who think they can deceive the justice system." The murmur turned into a mixture of shock and indignation. Several people in the room exchanged surprised glances. Never had a judge pronounced such a sentence with so blatant bias. Aisha finally stood up to speak. Her voice was clear, firm, but respectful. Your Honor, I contest this judgment. This decision is not based on facts, but on prejudice. I am innocent and I will do everything necessary to establish the truth. Whitman gave a scornful smile. You can, of course, appeal, but I doubt anyone will overturn my decision. As the bailiffs led Aisha out of the courtroom, her gaze met the judge's. There was a glint in his eyes, a silent warning, this wasn't over. Whitman thought he had won, but he didn't know that the injustice he had just committed would soon backfire on him in the most humiliating way possible. A few days after the trial, Judge Whitman was still savoring his victory, convinced he had upheld the law, in his own way. He didn't know that fate had prepared his revenge. In her lawyer's office, Aisha Johnson was preparing her counterattack. Every document, every piece of evidence had been meticulously compiled. But she didn't just want to appeal the verdict, she wanted the whole world to see the truth and for Judge Whitman to be confronted with his own bias. That same morning, an official statement was sent to local media and social networks. Aisha Johnson was not only a talented and principled lawyer, but the daughter of the state governor, an influential man, respected and known for his fight against social injustices. Whitman's phone rang as he was finishing his lunch. It was his colleague, Judge Marcus Hensley, who seemed unable to contain his shocked laughter. Edward, did you see that? Hensley asked, panting. Whitman frowned and took the call. Saw what? Aisha Johnson, the woman you convicted last week, she's the governor's daughter. And, well, she's publicly declared her innocence and exposed all your racist behavior during the trial. It's all over social media. Whitman felt his stomach clench. His hands trembled slightly. Everything he thought would be a triumph had just turned into a public disaster. His bias, his racism, and his humiliations toward Aisha were now exposed to thousands of witnesses. Judge Whitman tried to gather his thoughts, but the truth was overwhelming. The woman he had humiliated and condemned now held the power to destroy his career. He realized, with a mixture of horror and shame, that his arrogance and prejudice had just led him to ruin. The governor personally defended his daughter, publicly denouncing the injustice and discrimination she had suffered. Whitman was suspended, and an official investigation was launched into his conduct. For the first time, he understood that his racism and contempt for others had a price he would pay dearly. Aisha, for her part, remained calm and dignified. She had not only proven her innocence, but she had also shown that justice could prevail, even against those who thought themselves above the law. The whole world had now seen that integrity and courage can overcome racism and injustice. The days following the revelation were a true nightmare for Edward Whitman. Local and national media outlets repeated his name in every headline: judge suspended for racism, public humiliation after biased trial, career tarnished by prejudice. Each article reminded him, with cruel precision, of the humiliation he had inflicted on Aisha Johnson. The governor, Aisha's father, did not simply defend his daughter. He took steps to hold Whitman accountable. An internal investigation revealed years of biased decisions, judgments motivated by racism, and serious breaches of judicial ethics. The suspension became permanent. Whitman lost his career and reputation forever. In the courthouse corridors, Whitman now met the gazes of lawyers and local residents alike. Once respected and feared, he was now the very embodiment of the downfall caused by pride and prejudice. Every whisper behind him echoed as a cruel reminder of his bias and arrogance. Aisha, for her part, continued her work with dignity and determination. She dedicated herself to marginalized communities and used her influence to fight against the injustices that so many people suffered daily. Her victory was not only personal, it symbolized justice triumphing despite oppression and discrimination. One morning, Whitman received an official letter from the bar. He was barred for life from practicing law and had to return a portion of his compensation to cover the victims of his unjust judgments. In a final act of symbolic karma, Aisha made no public statement, but her name continued to appear everywhere, reminding the world and Whitman that the truth always comes out. Sitting alone in his empty study, Edward Whitman finally grasped the full extent of his mistakes. The years of prejudice, contempt, and humiliation he had inflicted on innocent people had led to this inevitable downfall. For the first time in his life, he felt the loneliness and bitterness of shame. Justice, this time, had triumphed brilliantly, and karma had run its course with relentless precision.